So thank you so much for joining us. I'm genuinely so elated. Welcome to our Female Voices series. I don't even know where to begin with this one because I literally stumbled across your profile on LinkedIn. And I just saw this beautiful post you had put up for International Women's Day. And I thought, what a better way to engage with you. And I just reached out to you. But I would absolutely love if you could start us off by introducing yourself, giving us a bit of insight to who you are, what you do, and everything in between.
Yes, absolutely, Sam. So thank you so much for having me today. My name is Dr. Deanna Kimbrel, and I am a consultant. I work in the management consulting field with a specialty in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I reside in New York, in the state of New York, in the United States, up in upstate New York, Rochester, New York. Many people get that confused with New York City, but it really is several hours away from New York City and really a different living environment, but nevertheless still in New York State. But we're working with organizations across the country and some abroad in implementing structure and strategy around leadership, around culture, and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Wonderful. Thank you. That sounds really interesting. Also, I've never been to New York. I'm a London girl, so I've been to different parts of America, always been on my list, but I've never had the time to. It looks beautiful though.
Yes, it is beautiful, and I can't wait to get to London. So that is definitely on my bucket list as well. So maybe we can switch. We can do a switch one day.
I'm down. Let's do it. Okay, perfect. That's incredible. Thank you. So I've seen, just as you mentioned, that you've been working a lot with diversity, equality, inclusion for so many years. In your experience over that time period, what are some of the main challenges that you've faced, whether it's personally or that you've seen other colleagues face, especially in relation to women at work?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question, Sam. So over the last 17 years, I've been working in the field formally and informally, directly and indirectly, and really starting my career out in human resources and managing many of the tactical features of being a human resource manager, and then going into some more strategic work, working with organizational cultures and leaders and things of that nature. But it wasn't until I was well in my career and I also do teaching and education and things of that nature in higher education. But it wasn't until I was well into my career and started to learn about organizational culture and DEI, and I started to have those aha moments. So when I started working on my doctoral degree is in management, organizational leadership. So it wasn't until that time through my formal education that I started learning more about organizations, organizational change, culture, and leadership. In DEI, I started to have some aha moments about my own experiences, about my ability to move and be mobile in an organization, to get opportunities, how I was treated within an organization, and how I kind of felt like sometimes when things didn't go right, it was all my fault, or maybe I wasn't good enough, and maybe I wasn't smart enough, and different things like that. But really started having these aha moments and thinking about the culture, the environment, things like bias and racism, and how that really played into my ability to grow in organizations, the way in which I was treated. And I started to have those aha moments. And before I knew, things weren't right and it didn't feel okay. But what was missing is that I didn't have the voice because I didn't have the language. So I couldn't articulate what was going on with me. There's a lack of inclusion. And when we talk about 15 years ago, there was no expectation, right? When you get into the workforce to say, I want to be included here. It's like, no, you just get in where you fit in, right? You just need to assimilate. We don't have to make space to who you are. And, the status quo was very, very present there. There was really at that point nothing wrong with with that and fitting into a dominant culture. So started to really have those aha moments and wanted to be a voice for people like me, just because of all these things that were happening as a woman, as a person of color, not being able to advance. I felt like it had really stifled my career, my abilities, and even more so the efficacy. And when we think about DEI, we think about the wellness, and we think about that psychological safety and the trauma that can be associated with some of those limitations. So it was really important for me over that time in my own journey of self-awareness and awakening that I become a person that has a voice for people that that are where I once was. So really being able to communicate for people working in and outside of organizations to implement change, and change policies. So, I'm all about the hearts and the minds of people, and making people aware of these things and hoping that they will change. But more so, I'm about changing the way in which things are done and the way that it can impact people through our processes, through our policies, through our systems. So really wanted to be that person coming into organizations to be that voice, but also be that change maker around those things. And there's tons of barriers that I've seen from my own experiences, as well as working in organizations. So most recently, I was a chief diversity officer in my local area for our county, for our area, and also some big companies as well that are international organizations, but working in those companies, but also working outside of those companies as a consultant, I see many of the barriers are the biases that people have. So, when people think about women, for example, women can be limited before they even get the opportunity because they may say, hey, she's a mom, so she doesn't have time to be a leader. She doesn't have time to take on this new role. So automatically your opportunities are being diminished because people are making decisions about what they think, the biases they have about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a caretaker, and many of those things which may not even be true without even having a conversation with you. So I see bias as being a big part of that in organizations. And then the systems. I think a lot of times people have been doing the same thing over and over for several years, 20, 30 years, or even from the inception of many older companies. And the systems and the way that we do things are biased, and they keep certain people out. And we're looking for certain characteristics that may be inherited to men, when actuality, when we think about things about being a leader, even more so now, we think about empathy, being flexible, being a good listener. Those may be some traits that are also attributed to being a woman. So I think that some of our systems are outdated and antiquated. People have biases, and then there's no real accountability to make sure that those things aren't perpetuating in organizations. I know that that's a long answer in a roundabout way, but yeah, those are some of the key barriers that I've seen for myself and others.
No, thank you for sharing. That wasn't a long answer. That was fabulous. I think you touched on so many different things. I mean, the first thing that came to my head, honestly, was, do you even sleep? Like, you sound like one of the busiest people ever. And, you touched on such like vital points. I know where you mentioned the element of being a mother. It's really interesting because it brought up another interview conversation that I had with somebody, a wonderful woman in Latin America, and she runs a e-commerce business for indie brands, so cosmetics, skincare. And she had also, much like yourself, achieved so many incredible things, and she's just gotten started. And she mentioned that one of the most poignant things that she'd ever heard from somebody was, because she has 2 young children, they said, you either be a good mother or you be a good professional. Like, as a woman, you just can't have it all. And for her, that was such a driving factor to keep pushing. And I think it's such a beautiful thing when I get to speak to women much like yourself, who've taken these negative experiences and biases that they've had and discriminations, but they twist it, because for a lot of people, it would be quite discouraging. They may actually go, you know what, fair enough. Like, maybe I'm not the right person for this, and walk away. And that's part of this mission that we're on with the Female Voices series, that we want to make people think, like, no, like, look at all these people that are here. And if we were to reach out to them, they would have your back. They would be that voice, that professional voice for you if you needed them to be. They would give you that education and the tools and resources, because who is to say what somebody doesn't deserve just because they've walked into a room and they are a man, a woman, or they have a particular characteristic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's completely, like, it's a very outdated mindset, as you've mentioned. But I think it's incredible that not only have you pushed that into your career, but you mentioned that you're also teaching in higher education as well. and you've gotten your own accreditations as well, which is absolutely incredible. It's clearly something you're so passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said is really important. And I think places like LinkedIn is a great place to create that network. So you may feel like you're the only one at your job or, in your organization that has experienced these types of things and these types of limitations and barriers and, discrimination. But I think LinkedIn has really been a great place for me to share my experiences as well as encourage others. So I have so many people connecting with me and saying, well, you did that post and it really inspired me. I'm going to keep on going. I know that I'm not the only one. And then even people connecting through the post. So I think that, be making sure that you have a network or you're seeking out a network to be connected with people that are like-minded, that have like experiences, can also be a great tool to continue to motivate people to kind of get through the stuff. Because like you said, you can start to feel defeated. But I think, connecting with a good network of women or, people of similar backgrounds and like minds, like experiences, is really something that can help you push forward, but also know what to do. Because when we're talking about the workplace, discrimination because of your gender or your race or, something like that, if you have a disability, those things are against the law, right? So those things are, there is a point of legality. And then how do I address those? How do I, present this to my employer, when things have gotten out of hand? Because, there's several different ways. We may be talking about sexual harassment. We may say you didn't get a job because you're a woman or, so how do you actually start addressing those things and holding people accountable for their actions and the decisions that they are making that are discriminatory based on who you are, which is so important. So I think that education piece is good as well, being educated on what the law is in your area, what your policies are in your organization, and then how do you start to make sure that you are advocating for yourself and you understand what your rights are. So I think that is just so important as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with, especially with understanding what you should do, who you go to, who you can speak to. And I think sometimes a lot of experience that I've heard of, and even I've been in that position before, is people that don't necessarily understand or recognize the fact that it doesn't have to be outward comments. A lot of the time, unconscious bias comes into play, and it's about learning those signs, learning those triggers. And it's great to say, oh, of course, it's a twofold scenario. Not only do we want to prepare women, men of all, like whatever characteristic it is that is protected, that we would like to support, it's about not only teaching them and encouraging them to understand what it is that they have in their power, but it's also, much like you said, it's about changing the ideology behind it. So in the future, people don't need to know what their rights are, because in an ideal world, we would live in a professional environment where these things don't happen at all.
Right, where people aren't being violated. And I think now we start to plant the seed, like you said, and like, the very basis of your podcast is the female's voice. How do I use that voice? How am I empowered to use that voice to implement change? And like you said, plant those seeds so the next generation, we don't have to talk about it because it is embedded into what we do, respecting differences and, not discriminating against people, having clear communication and having equal opportunity. Those things are just a part of how we work and how we live, but we have to be able to use our voice now to plant those seeds and let people know it's not okay. I'm not going to accept it. And, we can't go on until we've addressed this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've summarized it absolutely perfectly. Moving on slightly, I know you've touched on it in earlier on, but I know you were discussing about the challenges and things that have sort of pursued you to go into education, into consulting. Were those things something that you had personally experienced? Was it your own experiences that maybe encouraged you to pursue this career in consulting, or was it just systematic things you've experienced? Like, what was it that genuinely encouraged you to say, this is what I want to spend like my 9 to 5 and beyond, evidently, focusing on? And how has your experience as a woman sort of cultivated your journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said earlier, in my career, I kind of started having those aha moments and really gaining my voice. And then getting into DEI over the past 10 years or so, working in organizations, it seems as though you are always hitting a wall as to what you can do, right? So at least over the last 5 years, we've seen organizations become energized around DEI, and it become a part of business, right? So DEI is not something new, right? So we've always had, when we talk about, especially in the US, we talk about inequities because of race. I mean, that was just like the very thing the country was built on, right? So when we talk about those things are not new. When we talk about discrimination because of race, when we talk about separation because of race, when we talk about civil rights, and so those things are things that keep recurring in our society, and we start to call them different things. Right now, we are calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we see the business community start to really engage in them. In the U.S., we see after the George Floyd incident, we've seen a lot of social unrest be attributed to that, and people taking a stand over the last 3 years, but not really understanding what that stance means. And it be more than lip service. It be more than window dressing. And what it really takes to go into an organization, dig deep into that organization, and really start to change some of the systems that perpetuate inequities, discrimination, racism, sexism, ageism, and different things like that. It's a level of disruption. It's a level of change that I've noticed many organizations aren't willing to commit to financially, culturally, and hold people accountable for that. So, you really get to a wall. Some people want to talk about it. They want to have trainings, and that's it. That's fine. Some people want to do some things, but then they don't want to do others. And then some people want you to change the organization without actually having any type of power or influence or accountability to do that. So usually you get to a certain place in the organization and you're kind of hitting a brick wall. And as a professional, that became very frustrating to me because I know what needs to be done, but I'm not given the tools, the resources, or the support in order to do it. So because of that, that has led me to want to go into consulting a little bit more, because what it does is it allows me to, number one, have that conversation with the people that are contracting with me. As an employee, they are really expecting you just to do whatever they want to do, and that's it. As a consultant, you have a little bit more flexibility to say, well, this is, our deal. This is how we're going to do it. So you kind of put all those things up front and build that relationship and really understand what it is that they want to do. So in the beginning what your limitations are. This is the start and end of our relationship, and this is exactly what I'm going to do for you. So it's a little bit easier in a way to, do what needs to be done and get out of that organization instead of having to live in an organization knowing that they are not doing what they need to do in order to advance DEI. So it becomes a little bit hard, especially for me, because it becomes so personal, right? These things are really deep-seated to who we are. And when you take on the mission, it's, you see it every day. And when you're in a position to not really implement change, that creates your own psychological safety, that creates your own issues. So yeah, those are some of the reasons and benefits to being a consultant. And I think for every organization, it'll change. Some organizations you see going full force with DEI, giving their DEI leaders the tools and resources that they need, or so it seems. And then you see some people really just staying committed to saying, yes, we have DEI, but not really being tangible in that statement.
That's very interesting, because essentially in your experience, you must have come across so many organizations that almost do it because they're genuinely passionate and they want to create change. But on the flip side, you must also come across whether it's individuals or organizations that just almost do it like a tick box exercise. Like, we want to say that we've done it. We've interacted with Dr. D, with Kimbrel Management, just because we want to say, we've done it. like, here, we've got the stamp.
Yeah.
And that shows we still need that change. It's still very much needed.
Yeah. And when working with organizations, I really have to be clear. And, just because someone wants to work with me doesn't mean that I'm going to work with them, because if they're not committed to doing what we agreed upon, then I'm not going to work with them, because I don't want to be associated with an organization that's just checking a box, that isn't, going to be transparent about, who they are and what they're doing. So it really becomes a conversation to be had with that organization. And sometimes, that conversation works and you're able to really get people who are passionate. And sometimes you don't discover that until you start doing the work. But in the beginning, it's really important to have that conversation to really understand where people are, because you don't want to be, just that figurehead to say, yeah, I sign off on this. You really want to be able to do some work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the main thing that I would take away from what you've just said, what you've added on, is the element of how you're using your voice to set boundaries. And I think that's something that a lot of professional women, particularly women in leadership roles, actually struggle to do, because we feel like we're not actually really allowed to do that, because we're not given the opportunity to, or people won't take us seriously. So it's really empowering and it's really inspiring to hear you talk about the fact that you're like, well, it's great that other people may want to, but if it doesn't sit right with me, then it's not something that I will pursue. And I think that's a really important message that people take away from this.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really love that point about boundaries. And I think like we really haven't had the permission to do that. And it's just like they give us opportunities. So now we must always go above and beyond and stretching ourselves way too thin, not having work-life balance, not being okay with what we're being asked to do. And, I think you had a great point. We have to set those boundaries, and we have to use our voice to say, no, this isn't going to work for me. No, I have to be out by a certain time. No, you got to get somebody else to do it. Like, different things like that. I need more tools. I need more resources. I need more support. I think as women, we're used to taking on everything and, quantifying it, multiplying it, but at the cost of us, at the cost of our own wellness and self-care and well-being.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And that actually brings us on perfectly to my next question to you, because both through your own journey, which has led you to this point, and also all the work that you're doing with other organizations, you must have seen the sort of like renovation of a lot of organizations, like as they're changing the way that they work. And it'd be really interesting to know from your perspective, the really obvious benefits of creating an inclusive space that has women in leadership. How have you seen organizations change, and what are those benefits for people that maybe question that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's tons of benefits, and I think every organization is at a different level to kind of unlock the magic of diversity. I think all organizations say, yeah, we want to have more diversity. We want to have more diversity. We want to have more people of different backgrounds, more women, more people of color, more people with disabilities, because we want the benefits of it. But you have to be able to invest in it, and you have to be able to create space for it. So it's not like we want everything and we don't want to give anything, right? So you have to put the investments in order to receive the gifts of diversity, of having more women in leadership, and having more people of color and people of just very diverse backgrounds. And some of the main things are going to be innovation. So having a more innovative organization where people feel as though they can take a risk. And that's going to be the thing that keeps organizations more competitive. So being more innovative, bringing in more profitability, creating an environment where people belong. So people, instead of people just surviving in their work environment, they actually are able to be who they are and then start to thrive because they see more people like them. They have more of a voice. They are contributing more. So I think that those are definitely some of the benefits. People being more happy at work, of course, doing their job with more diligence. And just really a more well-rounded organization. And I think when you not only say this is what we're going to do, but you have a reputation of women can excel in this organization. You are heard. You are considered. We have benefits and resources to support you. If you have a question about something, we have the space in order for you to communicate around those things. Then you start to attract that diversity. You don't have to go out and find it, because you have a reputation of being a place where people from diverse backgrounds can thrive and excel and grow and advance. So I think those are just some of the benefits to diversity. Unlocking some of those benefits to diversity is really maintaining a reputation and having it embedded into who you are and what you do, and not just a statement that's on the wall or on your website, or a part of values that people actually just wrote. It is something that everybody in the organization can speak to, is tangible in everything that you do.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think you said something really interesting towards the end about the reputable part of when organizations, like, people can actually walk in and see that. And I spoke to, in another interview, it relates so perfectly about a woman who walks into a building for a job interview, and how, if she doesn't see any other women, is she going to be encouraged to go, okay, well, I'm going to have great opportunity here? Like, are they really investing into women? Do I stand a chance in progressing if I can't see any women around me and I'm only here for an interview? Like, what chance do I really stand? So you're right, it not only changes the culture, but it sets a tone for what walks through the door. And I think that's so important. And I think seeing women in leadership, particularly throughout this series, the Female Voices series, it's such a key tone and message that there are so many women out there that are driving forces, and it's such an inspiring part of the journey. And I think it has, not only for the fact that it's a requirement to have people of all backgrounds and characteristics, but it's actually so fundamental to creating a balanced workplace that has different voices, different opinions, different ways of working, different connections. And you're right, it brings creativity and innovation. And that's something that we've seen massively, being a financial technology company. With Unlimited, it's something that we see all the time. Like, I'm very fortunate, the organization I work for it's filled with a great balance of both men and women, but you genuinely can see the difference, which is so interesting.
Yeah. And one organization that I work for, and the thing is, organizations need to say, yes, this is an issue. We know that women in leadership is an issue. We know that, whatever the group needs to be advanced. We know that that's an issue, and we are intentional about advancing women. One organization that I work with, we implemented an emerging women in leadership program. So that's one thing you can do when you're going into organizations, and say, how have you invested in women in leadership? And if they can't tell you about how they've been intentional, how they develop women, what programs have they implemented, it may not be a real thing, right? It may just be something that they're speaking to, but organizations need to really be implementing programs for women, having tools and resources for women to advance and develop in order to ensure that they are able, ready, and being selected to step into leadership roles.
Exactly. And sort of touching further on the portfolio of organizations that you work with, I noticed that you guys have worked with other financial companies as well. And it'd be really interesting to know what the main common challenges you saw in other financial institutions in relation to women. So what sort of sticky points they had where maybe women weren't nurtured, or challenges that they faced in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that some of those general challenges around the biases of women in leadership are some that I've noticed in the financial industry as well. So really understanding or equating what women can do based on their caretaker status. Maybe it is, well, she doesn't have a leadership presence. That's something that always comes out. And they're looking for a more masculine presence in actuality, and not really defining or having a clear definition of what leadership is and what leadership means. Another thing is visibility. I hear a lot of times when women are going to be promoted, oh, she hasn't been visible in the organization, but she hasn't been given opportunity to be visible as well, and hasn't properly networked. And we see that the way that people network may be different, and it may be culturally relevant to some and may not be to others. So for example, I was reading an article earlier this week, and it talked about golf, how people get together mainly men, they get together as a place to network, talk about business over golf. But if you are maybe someone where golf isn't culturally relevant for you, then you're automatically excluded from those networking opportunities and those conversations because you don't golf. So, you know, situations like that, women are really getting looked over, passed over, and really kind of locked out because it may be something culturally relevant that they don't have the opportunity to experience. So I think those are some of the barriers. And then when women do get into leadership, they are really emulating more masculine characteristics that don't align with who they are. So then that creates more psychological safety for them because they're kind of trying to be something that they're not. And then they also start to, you know, discriminate and have biases against women as well, right? So, you know, it kind of has that effect as well. So I think that people need to be comfortable with different styles of leadership, and then also us as women ourselves be comfortable with who we are and knowing that who we are and what we bring is enough to be an effective leader and get the job done. There's more than one way to get a job done, and understanding that more than one way to be a leader, and understanding that and trusting in what we bring to the table is enough to be an effective leader.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really interesting, especially where you touch on the idea of how women have sometimes evolved themselves, particularly when they do enter leadership roles, because they feel as though they have to maintain a particular image to be taken seriously. And I think a lot of women that we've spoken to within the financial space throughout this series also touch on that, because it's quite a male-dominated industry. And typically you see women let go of this, what would be considered to be like a feminine side, because they feel as though from another, if they're in a room full of other leadership members, and they're majority men, they feel as though they have to be a particular type of like stern or harsh or speak a certain way, or maybe not dress in a particular way. And it's very interesting, that perception that a woman can be taken seriously if she mimics masculinity, rather than just being accepted if she has a more feminine nurturing side, or she chooses to dress in a particular way. That shouldn't be a contributing factor to whether somebody makes a good leader. And I don't think that's particularly just to financial industries, it's in general, but it's a very interesting observation. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I recently did a post where I tried to encourage women, like, be who you are. You want to wear dresses, you want to wear makeup and all that different stuff. That's not going to take away from your ability to be effective, to be a leader. And I think that's a part of awareness on women, but also on people, on organizations. And even when hiring and you're looking to hire leaders, more than likely they are looking for someone, maybe a man or someone with masculine traits. Height is also a factor that people look at when they're looking for a leader, because the unbiased mind, the unconscious mind is telling us that when you're tall, the taller people are more likely to be a leader. More masculine or men are more likely to be a leader. So those are some of the inherited biases that we have when we're thinking about how to be a leader. So even when we are our HR managers, our recruiters and things like that, they really have to be trained and get out of that mindset and really have a coordinated conversation around what are the real competencies that we're looking for. How do we find those, you know, when we're speaking to people in regards to who's a leader, who's a good fit, and different things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, particularly the physical side. I think also on the flip side, if you have a woman that absolutely hates wearing makeup and she wants to come in shirts and like slacks or whatever it may be, she should not also be discriminated against, because people have the right to wear and represent themselves however they feel most organically comfortable.
Exactly. And it's like, how do we get away from what we see and what we observe and really, getting down to what people are doing, how are they being impactful, because what you see in the outside is not going to always demonstrate what somebody's abilities are. So I think that those are some of the things that, and especially when we're unfamiliar with people, where our unconscious brain will kick in and tell us, okay, this means that, this means that. So we're categorizing people, but we're not checking our own biases to understand, okay, I made that decision about that person. Why did I make that decision? So we're not doing that. And especially at work, we're just going and we're categorizing, this means this is this is that. And we're not really going back to really understand, or even having someone else check us. Because sometimes our brain will tell us that we're always right. When we're making decisions, we're always right. And our unconscious brain always kicks in when we're not familiar with something. But we really need to, especially when we're making decisions about people, we need to have that backup. So that's why it's so good to have different people on your team, different backgrounds, because you have that different perspective, and you have several people making decisions, and kind of determining who's a good fit, why, what are some of those characteristics, and kind of pulling at, well, just because she's a woman, it doesn't mean that, or just because he dresses this way doesn't mean that, or just because this person has a disability doesn't mean, so that's why I think representation is good. Diverse perspectives are good, because it's really going to allow us to make better decisions that are not biased or discriminatory.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that's really interesting where you talk about our own like subconscious biases as well. And I think for some people, sometimes it's not conscious, we don't even intend to do it, but I know that there is, in a lot of spaces, as you must experience on a daily basis, there is resistance to creating more equal, diverse environments. So how do you think like organizations themselves and even team leaders can work to overcome resistances that they may find in the workplace to create a more inclusive space for women?
Yeah, I mean, and just like I said earlier, we have the ability to start to appeal to people's hearts and minds through educating, through bringing awareness and those different things. But biases are inherited to us, right? It's a part of the human condition. No matter who you are or where you come from, you are going to have biases. And those, we can mitigate them, but there is no way, Sim, to 100% get rid of our biases, right? The way that we really start to be able to see more of a return on our investments as it relates to DEI is around our systems. So not only what people are thinking and what their behavior does, but what are the systems and process that allow people to make this decision? What are our processes that reduce the ability to be biased in a decision-making process? So it really is implementing the systems and the processes in order to reduce the impact of biases and biased decisions for women, and creating more opportunities. So implementing programs, looking at the way in which things are done. Technology is a big one as well, and making sure that there's a group of people, make a diverse group of people making decisions around things like hiring, promotions, assignments, advancements, and different things like that. So it really is some strategic things the organization should do, and it shouldn't just solely rely on us as human making these decisions. We've been conditioned far too long to really check our own biases. Our brain is so strong in that way that we watch a lot of TV, we see a lot of things, we've learned things from our families, and all that things goes into our brain, and it we're very smart. It's going to tell us, no, you're right, you should believe that. But we have to have our systems in place in order to check that for us, and make sure that we're doing what we say we are going to do. If our goal is to advance women, we want to make sure that not only are we educating and training people, but our systems are also dedicated to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're right, it's a systematic issue everywhere we turn. You're right. There are things that are there that reinforce those behaviors and those like thought processes. So I couldn't agree with you more. I know that we've somehow managed to rush through our time together, but I do have one last question for you, which would be, just because of your path and how eloquently you can put everything forward. What would be the advice that you would give to the next generation of female leaders?
Yes, my advice would be to have courage. Use your courage, use your voice, and stand for what you believe in. And use it in every instances that you have. Don't be afraid. I mean, but you can be afraid, but still do it, right? So just have the courage to do what needs to be done. Say what needs to be done in order to make sure that you're getting what you deserve, and making sure that you have access to what is rightfully yours. And it is respect, it is advancement, and it is opportunity.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. Oh, Dr. D, I'm so gutted that our time is already over together, but I'm so grateful to you for creating this time to speak with me and share your experience and your journey, and just shed light on so many different great tools that people can use. I'm sure that if we can even reach out to one person through this conversation and make an impact, I would be more than elated. But I genuinely am so grateful that you've made the time to speak with me today. So thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. It has absolutely been my pleasure. I mean, I can always be reached on LinkedIn if anybody wants to reach me there under Dr. DEE. That it's within each of us, and is all of our responsibilities to start planting the seeds now for the changes that we want to see. And thank you for this podcast, because it absolutely allows us to start getting our voices out there and planting those seeds. So thank you for having me.